So I don't have any sheep, but I have a dog. Some of you may know that I have a very high maintenance dog, but that's actually another sermon. So I didn't want a dog, but I had a 14-year-old son, and 14-year-old children, they beg and beg and beg. And they make promises like, oh, I promise I'll take care of it. I promise I'll train it. Oh, please, 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 please. I was the final holdout in my household and decided it was not a hill I wanted to die on. So I agreed. And they brought home this little bitty Maltese puppy that fits in your hand. And everything was lovely for about 3 weeks, right? And then there's the getting up in the middle of the night to let the puppy out, and there's getting up early in the morning when the puppy gets up to let the puppy out. And suddenly it just became a bit of an inconvenience for the 14-year-old. Shock, right? So guess who ended up taking care of the puppy? The only person in the house that didn't want one, right? And so I spent hours every day doing the thing that you do when you have a new puppy. Now, so, fed him and bathed him and took him to the vet and taught him tricks and all of that. And so over time, I became his person. I was the one that he looked to because that's what dogs do, right? Now, other people in the house will play with him, right? And they take care of him when I'm not around. Not as good as I do, but, they take care of him when I'm not around. But when I come home, they disappear, right? And by the way, everyone should have something in their life that treats them this way. I'm just saying. So when I come home, then I'm the only one in the house that really matters. And this dog will follow me around. And you know this if you have a dog. He'll follow me around, and then he will sit and stare at me adoringly for hours. It's also a little creepy, so I just go with the adoring part instead. And the other thing about it is that this dog knows my voice. Right? I can call to him from any place in the house, and he will respond differently than he does when any other member of the house calls him. I know this dog. After 5 years, I finally have convinced my wife that it's true, the dog has expressions. He gives me a side eye when he's unhappy, right? I know when he's hungry, I know when he doesn't feel well, right? It's all the things we know when we are taking care of someone, when we're paying attention to someone. I know his I have to go outside bark from his I'm happy bark, all those things. And so one day we're sitting on the front porch in my house, and I'm sitting in the chair, and the dog's on my lap, and he crawls up over my body and lays across my shoulders like a sheep, right? Which didn't occur to me till just now. Across my shoulders to watch the traffic. And it occurred to me in that moment that I don't just own this dog. This dog belongs to me. And that in some very weird way that can only happen between an animal and their person, I belong to this dog too. It's the weirdest thing. It hit me that he means a lot to me, that he's good for me, softens me, right? Takes the rough edges off. Some of you appreciate that more than others. And he's just good for my soul. I realized that belonging is this amazing thing as humans that we desire really above all else. And that belonging is about hearing and following and being known. And that's probably the most important thing, is to be known by another. Now, again, some might say that a conversation about a dog is a bit of a stretch, but it starts as a conversation about sheep. That can't be any more of a stretch, right? And I think ultimately it's really all about that. Once we have that experience of belonging, we begin to understand what it means. We begin to understand what it means to belong to God. to be known by God and claimed by God and named by God. That it doesn't matter how we feel, it doesn't matter about that. It doesn't matter even if we're filled with doubt. It doesn't matter what we accomplish, what we do in the world. None of that matters to God. All that matters is that we want to be known. And it matters that we hear God's voice, and that over time we learn to discern God's voice and to know God's voice from the cacophony of other voices in our lives that are constantly trying to tell us something or sell us something or get us to do something. Voices of comparison and criticism and judgment. And we learn very quickly that those are not the voices of the Good Shepherd. Because the voice of the Good Shepherd is always a voice of freedom, is a voice of life. It is a voice that makes us smile on our insides. Right? When we're trying to determine what it is that God would have us say, it's hard. God's not standing next to us. God's not even in the next room. We always can remember that if the thing that we are hearing gives us life and gives other people life, we can be sure that that is the voice of God. And if it doesn't, then we should be a little more careful about that. So, what Jesus is reminding us today through this story in John is that we can sit secure no matter what we feel in any given moment. That we belong to God. Just like Max belongs to me. The question is what we will let ourselves belong to God. In the same way that I let this little 5-pound dog, that I let myself belong to him. We can be secure that when we decide that we belong to God, when we believe it, when we own it, when we live to hear God's voice, that we can rest in that, and that is the promise of an abundant life. It's what John says just a few verses earlier in this same chapter. I have come that you may have life and that you may have it abundantly. And God doesn't mean an abundance of things, an abundance of wealth, or even abundance of friends. God means an abundance of life, an abundance of love. Who doesn't want more of that? Who doesn't need more of that? And that's what it means to belong to God. It isn't about whether we make mistakes or not, whether we're sinners or not. It has nothing to do with that, because yeah, we all are, so what? It's about knowing that you are known. Everything about you, every hair on your head is counted. And that in spite of all of that, God claims us as God's own and calls us by name. And we are simply asked to follow, to listen to that voice of life and promise and hope and love and compassion and do that. To take that abundance of life that the Good Shepherd offers us and to give it back to the world. That's what it means to follow. In all of our imperfection and our sometimes stupidity, we just give it back. But we can't give it back if we haven't accepted that it's ours in the first place. And that's part of belonging. Part of belonging is accepting the fact that we are loved by that, whether it makes sense to us or not. And so, God calls us by name, claims us. My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. And the really, really good news is what comes next. No one will snatch them out of my hand. No one will snatch us out of the palm of God's hand. Not even us. Amen.